Welcome to Psyched Up, Emotional Fitness Programming. I'm Ron Curtis Jr., Media Director for Emotional Education Services, the producers of this program. Psyched Up features the EMOed system, short for Emotional Education. It's the system that provides us with strategies for emotional fitness. This edition of Psyched Up is entitled Letting Go. According to Dr. Mary McLaughlin, the creator of the EMOed system, letting go is not only the most important lesson in this series, but it's one of the most important lessons in life. Mary, you know, since I've known you, you've always said that letting go was the most important lesson that you could teach someone.
Well, Ron, there are many wonderful spiritual lessons in life which have to do with things like loving and forgiving and persevering. But without any doubt, letting go is the most important emotional strategy to acquire.
Now, why is that?
Well, in the two earlier programs which we did, where we taught people how to assess reality and manage anger better, we taught them a lot of skills to cope with problems and dilemmas. But it's important to understand that just simply coping well isn't really enough to achieve true peace of mind.
So then the benefit of letting go is peace of mind.
Absolutely. We can cope even very effectively with a problem or a dilemma and still end up feeling rattled about it. Letting go is the skill which allows us ultimately to move beyond it, to free ourselves, to move forward, and to accomplish something more productive.
Well, I know we should let go, and we may even want to let go, but the question is, how do we let go?
Basically, by changing the thoughts we think. It's really as simple as that. We can choose something different to think about. Unfortunately, however, many people don't realize that we can do this.
Now, what do you mean by that?
Well, let me give you an analogy. You know, on the physical level, if you go to a restaurant and you take a look at the menu or a buffet, you don't just gobble up the first thing that you see on the menu or that you see on the buffet. You kind of look the choices over on the menu, or you walk along the buffet to see what's there. And if you have a little basic knowledge of nutrition, you can make some healthful choices and you can bypass the rest.
Of course, that's not easy to do.
No. Like most health practices, it requires some discipline in the beginning. But after a short period, it really becomes a habit, and that makes it much easier.
Well, Mary, how does this apply to our thoughts?
Very much like the foods we eat, we can choose the thoughts which we are going to think. We don't have to be victims of the first thoughts that pop into our heads. We can choose to assimilate or focus on healthful and affirming thoughts. We can choose to focus on the most constructive and positive thoughts.
Well, how can we learn to do this?
We already have that ability, Ron. You know, sometimes when people have trouble falling asleep, they decide to count sheep. And they do this, and it helps them to achieve a more relaxed and peaceful state of mind. People have been doing this for a long time. Have you ever done that?
I don't really count sheep, but I usually do think of a very serene place, much like where we are right now, or of the ocean, or a sunset.
See, what you're doing is you are deliberately changing the thoughts you think to achieve a more tranquil state of mind. People who meditate do pretty much the same thing. They choose to focus pretty much exclusively on a certain word or phrase, or even nothing at all, in order to achieve greater peace of mind and a more relaxed state.
Well, then this is a little bit different than the other programs where you taught us many different skills. Here, I guess we're really talking about one skill, and you say it's something we already possess?
Exactly. There are several important issues here. First of all, we don't use the skill enough. And I think this is because we don't realize that we possess it. Mm-hmm. You know, just like we have enough information to make, in the food arena, to make good and sound nutritional choices, but in the emotional arena, we lack the basic information to make good and sound emotional choices.
Well, I would think that's where the EMOed system and these programs fit in.
That's right. This three-part program is our core emotional education curriculum. You know, just like there are basic food groups which help us to learn more about nutrition, there are three essential building blocks to good and sound emotional fitness. And these are the things which we have covered: assessing reality, managing anger, and now letting go.
When we choose to let go, we can achieve a more peaceful state of mind. We let go by deliberately changing the thoughts we think. We needn't be the victims of the first thought that pops into our heads. Just as with a buffet, where we can pick and choose the foods we eat, in our minds we can choose the thoughts we think and bypass others. Remember, letting go is a skill we already possess, and one we could benefit from if we just made more use of it.
Mary, you've told me that letting go is something we need to do more or less continually. What do you mean by that?
Most people reserve this skill of letting go for the big events in their lives. You know, we all seem to understand that we need to let go if there's a death or a divorce or if we move. But we don't apply this useful technique to these smaller things in our lives, the everyday irritations and annoyances which really have the power to erode our emotional well-being. I want to make people aware that they have the choice of using this skill at those times. I know that you told me a story the other day of when you went out at lunchtime to buy a videotape.
Oh, yes.
And you tried this technique.
Well, I'll tell you, it seems small in the grand scheme of things, but it was one of those little annoyances. Yes, I needed to buy a blank video cassette to tape an interview off the television which related to work that was happening that afternoon. So I drove to a nearby store, went in, thought this would just be a quick thing, and I get the videotape and walk up. Well, there's only one checkout line open, and it's a long line, and it's not moving very fast. And so I'm getting more frustrated and irritated by the moment. You know, I'm looking around for another clerk and, you know, tapping the video in my hand until I said to myself, you know, I'm going to give letting go a try.
It's important to know what to let go of, Ron. In this case, you really wanted that tape, so to let go of it and leave the store without it really would have been counterproductive. In this case, what you let go of were the irritation and frustration of waiting in line.
You know, this might be a good point at which to ask you the difference between acceptance and letting go.
That's an excellent question, and this is a good place to illustrate that difference. If you had just simply accepted the frustration and the irritation of waiting in line, you could have waited in line and still simmered and seethed about it and frothed at the mouth, you know. But in letting go, we kind of let go of this whole process of working ourselves up about whatever is going on. Now, I'm sure you weren't happy about this situation,
Right.
but we're not promising joy and happiness here. We're just teaching us people a skill, and which really just simply implies that if we let go, we're not likely to continue working ourselves up about something, and we're just going to feel a greater level of contentment.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I did, and I really did deliberately change my thoughts at that moment. I looked out the window, it was a beautiful day. As a matter of fact, the store itself reminded me of a store I was in when I was on vacation, so I thought about that and how relaxed I was, and it worked. I could feel the tension drain out of me. So I even use this when I drive because, as you know, there's plenty of frustration and irritation on the roadways.
That is certainly true. You know, when we change our thoughts, our behavior changes as well. I'll bet that when you changed your thoughts about waiting in line, that you waited patiently and stopped fretting.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did. That's also what I do when I drive. I drive a little more patiently.
This is a good place to point out that we are the only factor that needs to change in these events. You know, in this story of buying the videotape, nothing in that objective situation changed at all, only the way you thought about it and subsequently the way you dealt with it.
Letting go is something we need to do continually throughout our day and throughout our lives. It's important, however, to determine what to let go of. In the videotape story, I let go of the frustration and irritation I didn't need, not the videotape which I did need. In simply accepting the situation, I could have remained annoyed and irritated, but choosing to let go of it is what brought me some peace of mind. I didn't change anyone or anything in the situation. The only thing that did change was the way I chose to ultimately think about it. Remember, we can choose to act, not simply react.
Mary, you've spoken about the benefit of continually letting go throughout each day and really throughout our lives.
Yes, and a good example is with our children. And, you know, one day I received a call from a young mother, and her daughter was going to go to school the next day for the first time to the first grade, and she was expected to take the school bus. Now, this mother was really upset about that, and she wanted to drive her daughter to school every single day and pick her up and bring her home, even though the bus was going to stop to pick the girl up right in front of the house. And I said to her, well, if you do this, whose needs are you really meeting, yours or your daughter's?
And what did she say?
She thought about it a little bit, and she said, you know, Mary, you're right.
So her need was to protect her child.
Well, really, Ron, she was about to overprotect her child. Many parents have this tendency to overprotect their children. I told her, if you do this, if you drive your daughter to and from school every day, you will deprive her of the opportunity to achieve a sense of independence and self-reliance. And I reminded her that going off on the school bus to the first grade is really only the first in a long series of events where we'll be called upon to let go. You know, I told her, wait until your daughter is 16 and starts driving herself to school. The school bus will look pretty good then. Or when she goes off to college and lives in a dormitory and doesn't come home every night. Or even later when she gets married and moves away altogether. Now, it's important to realize in these instances that we're not letting go of our children permanently. In fact, we're really not letting go of our children at all.
So what exactly are we letting go of?
In this case, this mother was letting go, because she did decide to let her daughter go to school on the bus. She was letting go of control, and she was letting go of the security of doing everything herself.
So how is that going to help her achieve peace of mind?
She'll have peace of mind if she lets go of her anxious thoughts about the school bus. Up until now, this mother's thoughts have pretty much been emotionally driven rather than rationally driven. In other words, she was reacting rather than acting. We make better decisions when we bring things up to the rational or common sense level. In this instance, the mother could change her thoughts to focus on the opportunities and benefits that she is giving to her daughter by letting her go off on her own on the bus.
Well, in addition, she would free herself from this demanding driving schedule every day and have more opportunities to pursue, you know, other priorities. But I'm sure, nonetheless, that for a few mornings, she struggled with this whole idea.
That's an important point. You know, we don't really let go once and for all and forever. Oftentimes we have to let go of the same thing over and over again. And I'm sure that she did this on a daily basis for a while, that she, you know, rather deliberately changed her thoughts to more constructive thoughts about the opportunities that she was giving her daughter. But I'm sure it became easier after a while and she became more comfortable with this.
When we're facing a difficult situation, we can ask ourselves whether our thoughts are emotionally driven or rationally driven. In the story Mary just related, the mother realized that her thoughts had been motivated by her emotions, and that she really wasn't meeting the needs of her daughter, but rather her own security needs to control everything herself. By changing her thoughts to focus on the opportunities she was going to provide for her daughter, she in turn freed herself to concentrate on other priorities. Remember, she wasn't letting go of her daughter, but rather the anxious thoughts surrounding the situation.
Mary, you've told me that there are some things we need to let go of little by little.
That's right, Ron. Some things are really big events in our lives, like a death or a divorce or some major thing like that. These are the kinds of things we don't just let go of in one fell swoop. We really let go of them little by little over time. That's really how I was able to let go of my marriage.
Well, speaking of that, when I played the Managing Anger tape for some people I know, they commented that Mary must be some kind of superwoman. You know, here during and after a lengthy and difficult divorce, she raises her son to be a very successful young man, earns a PhD, develops this program, and starts a company.
Well, Ron, I can assure you that I was no superwoman. And in fact, on many days, especially in the early months, I was really quite the opposite. But I did use a specific set of skills to pull myself out of that downward spiral. And in this way, I was able to ultimately accomplish, over time, all of those things which you mentioned.
Now, you mentioned some skills. What were those skills you used?
In the midst, at various crisis points, I did manage my anger very carefully, but I was also applying the companion skills of assessing reality and letting go. And in this way, I was able to let go, little by little, one thing after another that related to my marriage, like trust and companionship. I let go of my house. I let go of financial security. But I didn't let go of these things all at once. It was one after another, after another, after another. And in this incremental way, I was able to ultimately let go of my marriage.
But what did you do with all of the anger you felt?
Well, in the Managing Anger part of this series, I described how I used the angry energy, which I felt as a resource for moving ahead. But I was able to do that because at each point, you know, when something happened, and I did the best I could to resolve it one way or another, I let go of my angry thoughts about it then. I decided not to think any longer about what had happened and what I could not do. And I made a very deliberate decision to change my thoughts to think about things I could do something about, maybe even things that I might enjoy.
Well, how do you know the difference, though, between letting go and just giving up?
That's a good question, Ron, and it's an important question. And the answer to that is we really never know for sure. It's a judgment call. But I think that if you look carefully at the facts, if you assess reality the best you can, you'll start to notice patterns. And if you're really being honest with yourself, you'll draw the correct conclusion. You'll most likely draw the correct conclusion.
Yeah, but that sounds quite painful. Say, in your case, letting go of your husband and your home and such.
It is painful. It's extremely painful. You know, it's ironic. People will accept pain on the physical level. You know, we'll go to the doctor and we'll accept painful treatments to get better. We'll even accept painful treatments to look better. Mm-hmm. You know, but many people will do almost anything to avoid emotional pain. That's why we have such a huge substance abuse problem in many parts of the world. And many of these people abuse substances not just to get high. They're really doing it to anesthetize and medicate themselves so that they don't feel the emotional pain. You know, people will abuse other things too. They'll abuse food, or they'll get into gambling or having affairs.
Well, I suppose it's a natural reaction to want to avoid emotional pain, but since you do remind us to act and not react, how does that apply here?
Well, you know, it does apply. The natural reaction, it really is to try to do anything to avoid the pain. But I think that what we need to learn to do is to let it wash over us and submit to it and experience it. Some things just simply hurt. There isn't any other way around it. And if we continue trying to escape that, we're not going to be able to move forward.
Towards peace of mind.
That's right, Ron. And you know, the flip side of letting go is hanging on. And hanging on after it makes no sense any longer is one of the ways in which we truly torment ourselves. In letting go, we free ourselves of that particular misery. And using the skill of deliberately changing our thoughts, we can move on to think of something more productive or something just plain pleasant instead. You know, in my case, in refusing to hang on and making the decision to let go, my behavior changed as well. And it really changed almost all by itself. And I started to become excited about getting out of the house every day, going to class and using my mind to think of new and different things. And in this way, I was able to achieve a level of peace and contentment.
So what you're saying is that a decision to let go is really less painful than hanging on.
Exactly, and it is much less of a struggle.
Mary, what about the person who says, I just can't let go. I'm just made this way.
Anyone can change his or her mind. We do have control over the thoughts we think. It's really the ultimate freedom. Of course, the temptation is very great to linger in the realms of misery and pain and regret. These are very, very seductive states. In the case of a death, for example, there can be a point at which grieving stops being a part of the healing process, and it really can start to be somewhat self-destructive. Sometimes it's easier to see this in other people than it is to see it in ourselves. And with other people, the temptation can be quite strong to tell them when they ought to move on. But that's a mistake. This is ultimately an intensely personal decision which we cannot make for anyone else, only for ourselves. Letting go is one of the skills which allows us, when the time comes, to move on. And that's how I deliberately moved on.
Letting go isn't always done in one big move, but rather little by little. Remember, letting go is not giving up. We choose to let go when it makes sense to do so. Knowing when to let go is a judgment call we can only make for ourselves. It may be very painful at first to let go, but ultimately not as painful or as destructive as hanging on. Using the skills in assessing reality and managing anger, Mary determined when and what she needed to let go of, including the anger she felt. At that point, she was free to pursue more productive activities. She chose to focus her thoughts on what she could do rather than on what she couldn't do, and we can choose to do the same. This allows us to let go with grace and with dignity.
Earlier, Mary, you talked about tormenting ourselves, and I thought this was an interesting concept. Can you expand on that?
It's very tempting to think that other people are tormenting us or making us feel guilty, and some do try. But ultimately, they can only affect us to the degree to which we permit them to dominate our thoughts. If we remember that we have the ability to change our thoughts, they lose their hold on us. However, in many cases, we can be our own worst enemies, and we can victimize ourselves brutally with things like guilt and shame.
I know this is a really big problem for some people, but aren't guilt and shame really components of a functioning conscience?
I think our consciences give us a good sense of what's right and what's wrong. And certainly if we are doing something wrong, we should stop it or try to correct it. What I'm concerned about here are those times when we really aren't doing anything wrong. Or on the other hand, when we really did do something wrong or shameful, or when we omitted to do something right, but it was so long ago, or it was so fatal or so final that there really is nothing we can do about it now, or that we can ever do to undo it. If continuing to torment ourselves with things like guilt and shame serves no useful purpose whatsoever in our lives any longer, then it's time to simply let go of them, firmly and deliberately.
You mean deliberately changing our thoughts to something else. Is it as simple as that?
Absolutely, it is as simple as that. There comes a time when we just need to say to ourselves, I am not going to torment myself over this particular matter any longer.
Of course, that doesn't mean the guilty and shameful thoughts will go away forever, does it?
Unfortunately, no. But it does mean that each time they return, we should firmly and deliberately turn our thoughts to something else. I believe that it is a primary moral responsibility for all of us to move towards health and wholeness. Most people would agree with this concept on the physical level, but may not realize its importance on the emotional level. And as a result, they tend to hang on to these damaging reminiscences way too long, and they actually pollute their emotional well-being by doing so.
Now, you said that there are people who actually didn't do anything wrong but still feel guilty. What about them?
Yes, there are millions of people like this in the world. For example, most working mothers probably feel this way much of the time. They feel the family's meals aren't nutritious enough, or even that they aren't delicious enough. And certainly the house is never clean enough. They also fear that they are not spending enough time with their children, let alone with other family members. Something can get the guilt going nearly every day. But you know, it is a reality that most women work because they need the money.
Yes, but the guilt still remains. So how do they let go of that kind of guilt?
Here they can choose to take a more positive and realistic view of the situation. When we haven't done anything wrong, but maybe feel that we just haven't done enough, we can choose to focus firmly and deliberately on all the benefits of our actions. Moreover, working mothers